There we go. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for History Happy Hour Women's Professional Baseball. My name is Callie McCune. I am the Manager of Engagement at the Indiana Historical Society, and it is so great to have you here this evening. Tonight's program is brought to you in partnership with the History Museum in South Bend and the Indiana Historical Bureau. And we're really excited to have both organizations helping us out tonight to bring you some history about America's favorite pastime and the ladies behind it. So I'm going to give you guys a few pieces of logistics before I pass it over to our speakers tonight. At the Indiana Historical Society, we are Indiana's storyteller, connecting people to the past. We do that by collecting millions upon millions of pieces of paper and then finding exciting, engaging, and sometimes saucy ways to share that. For tonight's discussion, through these documents, we hope to tell Indiana's diverse stories and to inspire a future grounded in our state's uniting values and principles. So for tonight's conversation, we're going to look at women's professional baseball. And I'm really excited to be joined by the people that collect the materials for the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, Christy and Kristen from the History Museum, and Casey from the Indiana Historical Bureau, who helped them put up a marker and is a huge baseball fan and was the person I knew I had to call when we were doing baseball history. But before I toss it over to Casey, I'm just going to go over a few pieces of logistics. For tonight's event, Casey, Christy, and Kristen will talk for about 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions. If you do have questions as we go along, feel free to drop those in the question and answer section of your Zoom screen or in the chat box. We'll keep an eye on them and pepper them in as we get to the second half of the program. If you would like to add anything, please feel free to add that to the chat box. Just make sure that you're responding to all panelists and attendees so we can all see your thoughts and contribute to the conversation. And keep an eye on that chat box. I'll be dropping links and URLs as we go along so you can learn and read more. Don't worry if you miss one. We'll send those all out in an email tomorrow morning to your inbox. And just so y'all know, this program is being recorded. You can catch the replay on our website, indianahistory.org, in the upcoming weeks. If you enjoy this program, we hope you'll consider coming back for more. Our History Happy Hours will continue in September 9th as we talk about native beadwork with Katrina Mitten and our friends at the Eiteljorg Museum. It's going to be great. Please come back. And then stay tuned for more History Happy Hours on ghost stories, murder, and so much more. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Casey Pfeiffer, a historian at the Indiana Historical Bureau and the manager of the Indiana State Historical Marker Program. She works with applicants on new state markers and oversees a collection of over 700 markers that have already been installed across the state. So chances are, if you're driving down the road, you've probably passed one of Casey's markers. She received her MA in Public History from the IUPUI program, shout out IUPUI, and is a 2018 graduate of the History Leadership Institute. Her research includes sports history, segregation and education, and the American home front during World War I and World War II, amongst many others. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Casey to get us started. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Callie, and thank you for inviting me to be part of tonight's discussion. I've really been looking forward to it and happy to have the opportunity to talk to Christy and Kristen. And this is great timing too for this talk too. Our team at the Historical Bureau has actually spent a good portion of this year researching the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, specifically with a focus on the South Bend Blue Sox. And that research culminated both in the installation of a historical marker for the Blue Sox that we got to work on with the History Museum that they applied for last summer, as well as an episode for our podcast, Talking Hoosier History at the Indiana Historical Bureau, that really looks at the 1951-1952 championship seasons of the Blue Sox. It is a great sports story of overcoming the odds and really places the team and the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League in context. So I'm sure Callie or I will drop that link in there too, if in case anyone is interested in tuning into that. But I do want to say I'm so happy again to be joined by Krisi and Kristen. Krisi Dunn is the registrar at the History Museum. She holds an MA in history from Western Michigan University with a primary focus on material culture and cultural resource management. She graduated from IU South Bend with a BA in history as well. As registrar, Krisi is responsible for artifact donations and loans, overseeing the care and cataloging of the museum's permanent collection. She also assists with exhibit research, design, and construction, among other tasks to support the curatorial efforts at the History Museum. And Krisi oversees the 3D artifacts for the AHEP-BL collection, which includes, of course, uniforms, equipment, and anniversary and souvenir pieces, which I'm excited to talk about in greater detail here as we go on. And we're also joined by Kristen Madden. Kristen is the museum's archivist. She received her MA in library science from IU Bloomington, specializing in archives and records administration, and holds a BA from Oakland University, where she majored in English and minored in history. In her position at the museum, Kristen is responsible for overseeing the two-dimensional artifacts, which includes the photographs, books, and documents there. And she's also responsible for responding to research requests that come in. And then concerning the AHEP-PL collection, Kristen oversees scrapbooks, programs, photographs, and handles most league-related inquiries. So guys, thank you so much. Welcome for joining tonight. And I know, as is tradition through the History Happy Hour series, what are you all drinking tonight? I know you started talking about it a little bit, but I don't know that everyone was signed on at the time. And do you think there is a drink that best represents the league or the Blue Sox or another team?
Well, I actually was searching for a drink that best represented the league. I wanted to find some Schlitz to drink. The ladies would go ahead and drink that after hours during spring training when they went out for dinner. Unfortunately, none of the liquor stores that I went to here in South Bend had it. So I went local instead. I still got beer because, as someone said earlier at the very beginning, beer's kind of reminiscent of time at the ballpark.
Sure.
And I'm not gonna lie, pictures and marketing works wonders on me. So I went local with Bare Hands Brewery, and I got Small and Soft, which I'm gonna show everyone. It has a kitten and clouds on it. And I saw that and I went, yes, I will try that.
Nice.
I had said that I had wanted to go with Round Bar Sangria because I unfortunately am not a beer drinker. So Sangria is usually if I want to be fancy.
Nice.
But I went with my standard, just a Mike's Hard Black Cherry.
And
Excellent.
when she mentioned sangria, our local ballpark, Four Winds Field, actually has sangria.
Yes.
So that is officially another ballpark drink up here.
Well, I, as a state employee, I'm on the clock. So right now I'm just drinking water, but I have it in a Cubs glass. My husband is a Cubs fan. I'm from Cleveland. So 2016 World Series was a little tough for us, but I'm still supporting it. And because of Wrigley's influence in the league, I felt it was most fitting for tonight.
Yeah, I grew up a Cubs fan. My grandpa and my mom used to say that you know, they weren't losing, they just were getting everyone else's defenses down so that they could be underestimated.
There you go. Yeah, I like that.
There's a long plan.
Well, let's jump in here. I want to kind of set the scene for everybody who's listening tonight. You know, obviously, you know, baseball is so often described as America's national pastime. I think, you know, it's captured the hearts and minds of generations, both here in the United States and internationally. We saw just last week with the Field of Dreams game that was played in Iowa the first time. You know, viewership was incredible and stuff. And so I still, you know, I think that interest in baseball, its tradition in the game is still so high. But, you know, looking at the 1940s, which is when the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, of course, starts, can you kind of set the scene for what is baseball like during that period? How popular is it? What is it like in the public eye? Krisi, you want to go ahead and start?
Well,
back and forth?
I mean, baseball in the 40s, I mean, I think that's a peak baseball time for everyone. That's when all of the greats were around. But, with us entering the war, it was a little bit different because a lot of the men who were playing were then heading overseas to fight for our country. So there was really a panic in the baseball community on what are they going to do, because baseball is really a big morale boost for everyone back home. People could watch it in person, they could listen to it on the radio. There was always a place that you could experience baseball. And if all these people were overseas, what were they going to do about it?
Yeah. And I think right now is actually one of the best times to understand how the country was feeling back in the 40s as far as sports, because that was the escape, and it brought everyone together. But think about last year when, sports games were being canceled and teams didn't know if they were going to make it. What were sports going to change for 2021, 2022? And they saw that in the 40s with the men going off onto war. Were the companies, were the owners of the teams going to be able to keep owning the teams? And it really pushed for innovation and a new way to bring people together.
Sure. Yeah, I like that. Well, and so in terms then, I think that's a great segue of how is it that the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League forms in this period? And, how does the league, I know, obviously, it evolves a lot over its 12-year history, but can you speak a little bit to its early years? Kristen, you want to start with this one?
So it really got started, as everybody mostly knows, by Philip K. Wrigley. But it was actually him and a couple of other ballpark owners from the Midwest that were like, what are we going to do? And they kind of came together, and the concept of having a girls' baseball league came up. There were lots of like barnstormer kind of just like amateur leagues that had men and women playing, just women playing. And they kind of were like, well, what if we get these women to play? It's kind of like a little risque thing. You get to see women playing baseball. It's a little crazy. It'll bring people in. And it kind of just stuck in the Midwest. A lot of people wonder why it was just there. It's partly because it was started by Wrigley, but also there were travel restrictions. There was gas shortages. All of it was going towards the war effort. And you had to think about how far you could get on a train, because a lot of the women until after the war, they didn't have the buses to travel places. But in the beginning, they were actually playing baseball. They were playing softball, but with the rules of baseball. So they were playing on shorter fields. They were throwing underhand, but they had major league rules to go with it.
And I want to point out, talking about the distances traveled and everything, Kristen mentioned the gas rationing and that they had used trains. It's also important to realize that a lot of these women, they didn't have their travel and food paid for them. They still had to pay for it themselves. So if it was, a choice between traveling short distances or, having the number of available women go from the hundreds, quite possibly down into just, you have 24 women who can afford that, they're going to keep the distances shorter. One of the things with looking at the 3D artifacts that we have, and a lot of people don't realize that, sorry, I lost my train of thought. That happens with people. I lose my train of thought a lot. But a lot of people don't realize that you can tell a lot from 3D items. And to us, everything is historic. We've had a lot of people, to them, the 40s and 50s, unless you're talking about war memorabilia, it's not quite old. It doesn't seem like an artifact, more of a vintage item. And we can tell a lot of history from these items. And one of the things that we look at is the ball size.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I get a lot of research questions about what size balls did the players play with, and what can you tell from it? And they actually started off with a 12-inch ball because they played softball through underhand. And then we see it go down to 11-inch, 10-inch, and eventually 9-inch. And some of them, like the 10-inch, was only played with for, I don't even think it was played with for a whole season. They went down to it and then decided just to use the 9-inch regulation baseball. And, you know, nowadays we can just talk to people who've played, who remember it going from softball to baseball, but eventually in 50 years from now, someone might have to look at the ball size to realize that. And I don't mean to just keep talking about baseballs, but that's one of the important things with that. And I saw someone had commented that the teams actually did travel for spring training, and they did. A lot of the women, baseball wasn't their full-time job. They still worked in factories or other companies while they were playing baseball, and they would save money to travel, and they would train down in Florida. They would train in Cuba. There were actually several Cuban players with the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. So, you know, they did travel. They just couldn't afford to do it all the time.
Now, the league did pay for some of the things. Like, it would have been like, we could pay part of your flight, or you get a stipend when you're on spring training for food, but it would get you maybe like a really crummy sandwich and a Coke, and not like if you're out practicing in the heat for, 10 hours a day, I think you want something a little more than just like a ham and cheese sandwich and a Coke. So they would have to spend more money on it, or as they did in Havana, kind of fight the managers to get them more money. So
yeah, I know, salaries and contract negotiations were a big deal. Obviously, they're now, they were then. And I think, as the league evolved and continued to make changes, you see the talent with which these women played. I mean, they just wanted to be paid for, their performance, reasonably so. And you guys, we started kind of addressing this, but we talk about, the league being mainly focused in the Midwest, but can you address, I know we've noted that South Bend, of course, had the Blue Sox, one of the 4 original teams. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other teams and, why they were based in the cities that they were? Krisi, you want to start on this one?
Well, of course, we have the South Bend Blue Sox.
Not that we're biased or anything.
We're not biased or anything. Blue Sox rock. Of course, there were the Peaches. Oh, yes, I forgot we had this, this draft here. The Rockford Peaches, which a lot of people, I think that's the team that people are most familiar with because of a league of their own. You have the Kenosha Comets from Kenosha, Wisconsin, and the Racine Bells. And these were the first 4 teams. And the reason they started in these cities had a lot to do with industry. These 4 cities were booming in the Midwest at this time. And that's not to say that the other towns like Kalamazoo was booming. They were right by Parchment with the paper factories, and were actually well known for celery too. Battle Creek, Minneapolis, Muskegon, and of course Chicago were all booming. But Wrigley, for one, didn't want to just have Chicago be, just the main focus. He wanted it to be a league. So, you go out to these other cities that are within, a short day's traveling distance from Chicago. So people in Chicago can still travel and go watch these games. There are also hubs in the Midwest where women from all over the country could reasonably be expected to go play if, they tried out, made the teams. South Bend was pretty easy to get to with the train system. pretty much all of them. So you have all of this that plays into why these cities. But in the 40s, industry was the big thing. A lot of these women also worked in the factories because the men not only went to fight from the baseball teams, they went to fight from their factory jobs. And so you had the women taking their places in more than just sports. As a matter of fact, the women also, there were women's basketball teams at the same time. One of the Blue Sox players, Betsy, played for the usherettes for basketball when she wasn't playing baseball. And then she also worked in the factory. So you have these whole lives of these women and their families that are wrapped up in work and baseball and society and everything. So you needed cities that were close enough to travel to quickly, cheap enough to travel to, and, you know, kind of just areas that they might already be in.
Yeah. And you started addressing it, you know, in terms of tryouts and, you know, talking about distance. I mean, I find it fascinating how far some of these women came, you know, to play from across the country. And I know it's amazing too, looking at it, how many people are from Saskatchewan or other provinces in Canada. Can you talk a little bit about, here's Wrigley and, you know, these other owners forming the league. How does word about it spread early on? How are these women, able to join? Kristen, you want to go for that one?
So how they got, how they got recruited was kind of similar to how a lot of the men got recruited. They did send scouts around. I cannot think of his name right now, but there was a pretty famous scout at that time who actually went around and met a number of the women as well. Yeah. And, you know, they were putting it in newspapers. You were just kind of hearing word of mouth from friends. And a lot of it was just kind of like recruiters. It was just like regular baseball to them. And how, since a lot of, you know, Wrigley and the other people were, you know, that's what they knew how to do. So the best way to do it is how they treated the men.
Yeah. And, it's interesting to think, looking at, again, you know, women coming from all over. You mentioned some of the players who also had come from Cuba, but, you know, you're in this period of the 1940s where Jackie Robinson integrates Major League Baseball. Now, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, it never does integrate. I think in our research, we come across that there were several African-American women who had tried out, but for one reason or another, we're not chosen or ended up playing on any of the teams. Have you guys come across any that have? I just want to make sure that I'm correct on that.
Well, we that's definitely, especially nowadays, something that a lot of people are looking into.
Yeah,
there were Cuban players on in the AAGPBL. What a lot of people don't realize is a lot of times they were Cuban players who were light-skinned enough to pass as white. If you were darker skinned, if you were African American, you were turned away. And that is because of racism. Wrigley and the other owners, the team owners, they wanted to get the biggest crowds. And I think that's something that we can't ignore nowadays, is how much that actually played a role. You wanted people who you could say, oh, look at all of these players, and you ran a risk if you had someone who was too dark skinned that perhaps you wouldn't get the crowds. And Jackie Robinson, of course, he worked to break those barriers. And nowadays we think of him as, a man who paved the path for non-white players. I think people forget, maybe not necessarily forget, but it's easy to ignore the fact that he still had a really rough time.
Exactly, yeah.
People still hated him. They still boycotted games because of him, even when he was at his peak. And you take that and you think about it being women who were already having a hard time just breaking into the field of sports. And for non-white women, it was exponentially harder. And so African-American women did have separate leagues. African-American men had separate leagues. And the more we start to research it, the more we're actually finding about these, because of course it was left out of what I would say generally what we're taught at is history. And that is the white history. It was left out over the decades. And so we're just now starting to integrate all of the stories and look at a more complete history.
They did have a couple of African-American players try out. And I do believe that I had read a newspaper article once that said that they did have a couple of players actually work with them during spring trainings. And later on in the league, we have some administrative files that said that they weren't necessarily saying that African-American women couldn't play in the league, but they'd have to have the standards of the league. But if a league, a team were to say, yes, you can come play with us, all the other teams would be required to treat that woman just like everybody else. So they try to kind of at the end say like, oh yeah, we can do this too, but it was kind of like off to the side.
And
I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wanted to address to people that we are seeing the comments pop up in the chat, and I love that everyone seems really passionate about baseball. They're having a discussion. We are seeing these, we just can't address all of them right now. But Monica W, I don't want to mispronounce your last name. She made the comment that Jackie Robinson first played for the Indianapolis Clowns. And I think that's important to look at because it was a team that had both men and women. And of course, Indianapolis.
I always like to mention one of the African-American women that did try out and was unfortunately turned away was Mamie Johnson, who is pretty famous and went on to have an amazing career. She actually, I think she actually played for the Indianapolis Clowns at one point in time. So
I say yes, I'm not 100%
agreed. We started addressing it in terms of the makeup of the league, but really going to Wrigley and the other owners' image and what they wanted to portray to crowds and stuff. There is obviously the femininity piece and component, such a huge part of the league. I think so many people, their first, intro is, oh, women playing in skirts and dresses. So, addressing that a little bit, Kristen, how that component, again, we never want to take away from the innate athletic skill of these women, but it was such a large driving factor of the league and the image that Wrigley wanted to portray. Do you want to address that for a little bit?
So the uniforms that the women ended up playing in were actually designed by Mrs. Wrigley and a fashion designer that was supposed to be functional and feminine.
Yes.
I don't know how functional it actually was. But it definitely, if you guys have ever seen the movie A League of Their Own, they do talk about that. A lot of the women who had been playing for, small amateur leagues they were basically wearing what men were playing in. And so having to wear these kind of uniforms was kind of ridiculous. But because in some of the photos that we have, they're basically in A-line dresses that came down to their knees. And Christy can attest that they changed that stuff themselves, whether the league liked it or not. Especially when they were throwing underhand, having a huge skirt is not really all that functional. You keep hitting it all the time. And so the ladies would change them. We have skirts are, we have uniforms where they're basically just cut just like below their butts.
Yeah.
So you could see the bloomers that they had underneath it. They're very fitted to their legs. So yeah, they kind of made their own version of the uniforms by the end of it.
And it's interesting to look, because we have several uniforms in the collection, and you can see the original stitching. And for the majority of them, when you really get close and look at the nitty gritty construction, you can tell where they were changed.
Yeah.
You can see that they were hemmed up. They were pinched in to give the players a little more shape, pinched in at the waist. And, you can see where in one of them, you can tell it was hitched up a little bit, and then it was hitched up a little bit more. So, and of course, we don't have a lot of bloomers because with sliding, because these women weren't going to play softly just because they were supposed to look soft. They were still sliding and, getting dirty, tearing up their uniforms. So bloomers, of course, didn't really survive all that well.
Yeah. Well, and in terms of, as you see in A League of Their Own, in terms of charm school and the chaperones, I know it's a movie, it takes some liberties being in Hollywood, but those things did occur. That was an active part of the league. And now, was that something that the players had to do throughout, full season? Was it prior to spring training? Kristen, any information on that you can share?
Spring training was kind of when they were doing the charm school. They didn't end up doing it through the whole history of the league. After a while, they were like, this just isn't going to work. But they did give all of the ladies a booklet. I believe it's something like how to be popular and charming.
Yes.
And it gave them like exercise routines they were supposed to do before bed, what all makeup they were supposed to have in their bags, how they were supposed to act on and off the field. The girls were not allowed to wear pants off the field. I was told a story once about how after a game, they were on their bus and the bus broke down and they had all changed into, shorts and pants. And so they were going to have to hike back to town, and they were all forced to get back into their skirts and dresses and put on makeup and do their hair and then trek all the way back into town so that they could get a tow truck and bring the bus back. So there was a lot of, you were supposed to be, very feminine, but act like a baseball player.
Right, exactly. No boyish bobs, lipstick on at all times.
Yeah, we actually have records of players who were actually removed from rosters because they cut their hair too short and it was considered too masculine. So they were like, I'm sorry, maybe try out again later on when your hair's grown out.
Yeah, it's incredible. But yet again, you have so many, think over 600 women participated in the league throughout its history, just incredible athletes. And I think, their statistics speak for themselves. The fact that they had to contend with this, image that they had to uphold, but be the best they could be on the field. And these are women who just wanted to play and enjoyed, the love of the game. So I'm sure in all your guys' research, whether they're deceased or alive today, is there a ball player that you would just have loved to, have a conversation with, get their autograph? Anyone in particular jump out at for both of you?
Well, we're of course going to say Betsy Jocko.
Of course.
Yeah.
If anyone has been following South Bend history or the Blue Sox history lately, they would notice that this year we've sort of made a big deal about Betsy because she just had her 100th birthday in February. And we kind of threw her a birthday party. With COVID. We could only do so much, but we put out an ad calling for people to come and do a drive-through. And it was a bad winter day. There was a lot of ice, sub-zero temperatures, but we still had almost 30 vehicles show up. And we all met, and we decorated our cars, drove by the facility she was living in, and Stu from the South Bend Cubs was there and greeted her and gave her a cake and everything. And
she also got a ton of birthday cards.
Yeah.
We put a call out to
Nice.
everyone who wanted to send birthday wishes. There was also a video that went out, anyone who wanted to do a virtual birthday card for her as well.
Yeah, and I don't just want to talk about the things that we did. One of the reasons that we admire her so much is just she had, gone to school. She worked hard to actually get her master's degree. A lot of people in town remember having her as their gym teacher at Measle Elementary School here. And she played for the Blue Sox. She played for the Usherettes basketball team. And we had a members night at Four Winds Field just a couple of weeks ago for South Bend Cubs. And at 100 years old, she still went on the field and threw the first pitch. So if you try and help her, get up and walk somewhere, she will put you in your place.
I saw the photos. I was like, I want to be there.
Threw the pitch.
Oh, it was another player?
Yes,
she has
sorry.
thrown the pitch.
She has. We actually had a
Okay.
different player who came out and threw the first pitch. But
I promise I was there.
Yes, Betsy was there though. Usually up until
I saw the pictures. I saw the proof.
Yes, up until a couple of years ago, she was throwing the pitch, and she's just decided that she's gonna let other people have the spotlight now.
Yeah.
And then another one of our favorite players is Isabelle Alvarez.
Okay.
And she, fought the racism, and she played for the Colleens and for the Daisies, Fort Wayne Daisies. And she was a good player, but she's a really wonderful lady too. We've been able to meet her, and I got a signed baseball card. For the record, if any of you watching this ever meet one of the ladies, you're at an event or you even just see them out, they're almost always carrying baseball cards on them. They're more than happy usually to sign things. And the All-American Girls, the AAGPBL Players Association, they actually do a lot of events where the public is invited. They're player events, member events, but they're very active in keeping everyone together.
Isabelle was a teenager. She got special permission to come to the US because she was so young, and she didn't have any kind of passport or anything like that. And they had to file a ton of paperwork to get her to come. And she was very excited, but also very afraid because it was the first time she'd be leaving home. She wasn't going with her family. And they were like, no, go. You need to do this. And she didn't speak English very well. A lot of the Cuban players didn't. And so it was a huge culture shock. And she ended up staying here because she liked it so much. So she really overcame a lot to do a thing that she loved.
And then,
I think that is a huge component too, what you just mentioned in terms of for how many of these women this was their first time away from home. And you had some family members who were actively encouraging it and do it, and then some who were a little bit more hesitant to, I'm sure to let their daughters go halfway across the country in some instances to play what's considered at the time a man's game. One of the players too, I think there's a picture in our PowerPoint too, Jean Fout really jumped out at me, when we were doing research for our podcast episode, just the numbers that she put up in her seasons. We look at baseball today. I saw Shohei Ohtani with the Angels last night hit his 40th home run and is, again, having a stellar pitching year as well. And Jean Felt was the same. I mean, a batting champion, but then, I think in 52, had an ERA under 1. It's just incredible. And I think over her entire time in the league, it was just over 1.2 or something. So, just incredible numbers. And, something I find interesting too is, whether it's with Betsy or some of these other players, like for a long time in there, you have about 20 or 30 years before you start to get their recognition in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, before you get movie A League of Their Own. These stories really aren't told. And I remember Rick at the dedication, president of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League Players Association, mentioning that for a long time, these women didn't really talk about the incredible experiences they had, despite the fact that they, loved it and meant so much to them. Anything you guys want to say to that, point? Have you guys felt that in your research?
I know that a lot of them it was something that they loved doing, but it was their job, and nobody really wants to hear about how your job was. Like what'd you do? I went to work. I mean, granted, I got to go play baseball at Wrigley Field. The first time that they ever were able to play a game at Wrigley with lights for a night game was an All-American Girls Baseball League game. Yeah. And, they were the first in a lot of things. When they went to Cuba, Jackie Robinson was there for spring training, and the Cubans wanted to go see the girls play. They weren't too thrilled about the Dodgers, but you want to go see the women baseball? Yes, they do. And they actually ended up starting their own league because they were so inspired by them. But to the girls, it was a job.
Yeah. And then there's also a level of, it's what they loved doing, and they weren't meaning necessarily to make a big statement. Like, for a lot of, especially young girls nowadays, it's inspiring to see these women, step up to the plate, literally and figuratively, and break down these barriers. But they just wanted to play ball. They loved the game. They were good at the game. And, they probably could have, they loved the big crowds, but they probably could have cared less about, if people didn't want to see them. And so it's become inspiring. And I'm sure that they at least had an inkling at the time that they were making waves, but they saw an opportunity to do what they love. And I think, at least I hope, that any of us nowadays, if we had that opportunity, we would take it without necessarily thinking, am I inspiring people with this? Which hopefully you are, but if it's what you love to do, you deserve to treat yourself a little bit like that. And I did want to mention one other player, and you talked about Rick Chapman. His mom played, Dorothy McGuire Chapman, also known as Mickey McGuire Chapman. If anyone has been to Cooperstown and has seen the AAGPBL statue, that's her.
Yes.
And Rick, the whole family's been involved. Rick is wonderful to talk to. And I can only kind of imagine what it was like talking to her, just talking to him. But I wanted to at least give a shout out for her.
Rick, by the way, in case people don't know, he's actually the current president of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League Association. So.
Well, I want to get to, one of the questions that was asked here, which was how many of the players of the original teams for those first 5 seasons are still alive today? It looks like we had a couple people addressing this in the chat, that about 80 players are still living, most from the later years of the league, though.
I know that about the time that we were celebrating Betsy's 100th birthday, we were talking to another associate member and had mentioned that there's maybe 3 or 4 members that are still around. I believe most of them live in Canada, that are also over 100 now. So we do have some of the older players that are still around. But a lot of them are still from the later years. and we have junior leagues. They had junior leagues later on. And we also get a number of like bat boys and bat girls who come to the reunions. So
they have some of the best stories.
Yeah.
And another question we had here in the chat, in terms of, someone mentioned that these women did have so much going on, that they had to contend with, as we talked about. Were most of them single, or were the majority of them balancing the family component? Kristen, you want to address that?
It was a mix.
Yeah.
There were a lot of them who were very young and, by the societal standards at the time, they weren't married, so they were single, and they stayed single as they were playing. There were several who were married and would go off. Some of them had to figure out how to balance if their husbands actually had to go off to war. There were women who started playing and then had to stop because of that, to take care of children. And then another aspect that is, I think, just in the last few years really being talked about is that there were lesbian players, bisexual and lesbian players on the teams as well, who by, the 1940s and 50s standards, they were single, they weren't married, but they might have actually been in relationships with women. They just couldn't be open about it. You really had a mix. And I don't think you can really say that it was majority one way or another.
There were actual players who played while they were pregnant. Dottie Collins, who was a pitcher for the Fort Wayne Daisies, I believe, she found out she was pregnant, talked to her manager, talked to her doctor, was like, I don't want to quit. Like, what do I do? And she played almost until her second trimester. It was only her manager and her catcher who knew, and she's told lots of stories later on where they were like terrified that something was going to happen, and she's like, it's fine, don't worry about it.
Well, and with Jean Fout too, you have her husband Carl Winch ends up being the manager of the Blue Sox later in some of those later years, and they had a son. So I think, like you said, it's kind of a mixed bag. There was a great diversity there. Kristen, there was one question, I think, because of one of the comments you made earlier about girls playing basketball during this time period too. And do you happen to have any information about where they played or practiced around town?
The team that they played for was the South Bend Usherettes. We actually just learned about that in the last year. Betsy actually donated a large amount of her material to us, and we actually have parts of her usherette uniform, a picture of her. And it was kind of run partially by like businesses. The South Bend Usherettes was actually part of the Ushers society for the Parks and Rec in the area. But lots of other places, it was just kind of like a company or one of the businesses had a basketball team or, something on the side that the girls could do. And if they were on the off season and they didn't want to go back home, they just kind of found kind of like an intramural team to play for.
Yeah, and a lot of the cities that had the basketball teams could be found in a lot of the cities that had the baseball teams. And some of that was also other people trying to capitalize off of the money that was being made by the women being in the baseball teams. And it wasn't as popular. And I think a lot of that had to do with just the other sports not being as popular. Baseball at the time really was the, sport to keep America together.
Yeah. Well, you team me up well too for the mention of Betsy donating portions of that collection. Are there specific aspects and items from your collections that you guys are most, fascinated by, that you really want to share with our listeners tonight?
My favorite things are always scrapbooks.
Yeah.
I'm partial to 2D things. No one would have guessed that. But I really love the photos that we get. Betsy gave us a lot of photo albums, and some of my favorite ones are just candid photos of the girls just kind of hanging out. I love their time, hearing about their time in Cuba, and she had a huge scrapbook of just like them going to different places, them at their hotels, you know, sunbathing and hanging out. And you really just get to see a whole different side to them. It's kind of like seeing your celebrities in real life. It's, you know, you see them as these like stock photos of them on the field and maybe like a couple posed pictures of them, but it's them at the bar having fun or at the beach and just kind of being silly. And it's really interesting. Then you get to see them as people as well as, you know, these incredible athletes.
Yeah.
I
remember seeing a photo. Like, go ahead. I'm sorry, Christy.
Oh no, you go
please.
ahead.
Well, I just remember seeing a photo of one of the players, and for the life of me, it's escaping me. But like the whole team is looking at her, and she's just laying on the ground. She's got a huge bruise, like half of her dress is like lifted up. Yeah, it's one of those iconic photos. But Christy, please, were you gonna say one of your favorites?
I like looking at the uniforms. You can tell a lot from them, but I also just like seeing the uniforms. You know, it's like, oh my goodness, they wore this. And you can see the patches and everything. And I like, we have a lot of items from the reunions. I love the photographs from the reunions, but there are also these souvenir bats that are about a foot long that the teams will autograph. And then one other item, you know, we haven't talked a lot about A League of Their Own. And that's actually been intentional because we've sort of been on this path. We all love the movie and it really did bring attention to the league, but we've been trying to make sure to, you know, talk about the women themselves in the league, but we still love the movie. And we have an autographed script from the movie, autographed by Tom Hanks, Lori Petty, Gina Davis, Madonna. And the autographs are wonderful, but looking at the script is pretty amazing. You know, going through and, you know, I found where it says there's no crying in baseball just because I wanted to see it.
Yeah, you have to.
So, and we have an autographed baseball from the movie as well as one of the uniforms that was worn. Actually, the scripts right now can be seen on display at the Children's Museum down in Indianapolis. So just a little plug to them.
Well, can you guys speak quickly too as to how the History Museum came to be the repository for these materials?
We talked about this once and we're not 100% sure. I think partially because the History Museum is here, as we're, you know, the second largest historical society in Indiana, and having that home base of having the South Bend Blue Sox, who was one of the only two teams to make it the whole length of the league. That maybe the association was like, I think this might be, this could be a good place for it. And we really have just taken it to heart. I'm always so thrilled to tell everyone about the baseball league. I will talk your ear off about it. And we've really worked really hard to kind of make people aware that it's here. And how critical it is to just kind of the history of women, the history of athleticism in the US, and just how it's become this jumping off point for so many different things in the world.
And I think most people are familiar with the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. And if you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. But I think it's beneficial to have a museum that talks about the league, where the leagues were. So South Bend is a very central point for all of the leagues from Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana. And I think that kind of helped us. And Another part is that when we started to receive some of the donations, we had an interest in it.
Mhm.
And I think that actually helped fuel it, because we wanted to make it known that we appreciated it and that we wanted to tell the story. And I think that really helped us create that relationship with the league and the Players Association and build from there.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. I'm so excited. It's been fantastic talking to you guys. I think I could talk to you all night. I still want to pick your brain
I
about so
love
many
talking to you too, every
players.
time we do.
And yeah, I'm so glad too that just a few months after getting able to work with you all on the marker that we get to do this. So I look forward to the next time that I get to see you guys. And I'm going to toss this back to Callie now so she can wrap up.
Thank you so much,
Casey.
Christy and Kristen and Casey. This hour's flown by for me, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I like the tidbit about the first night game at Wrigley Field was the women. Keep that one for your trivia night. I'm going to share with you our favorite GIF of the night as I wrap up. Because why not? Let's have some fun. So thank you again for joining us tonight. If you enjoyed this program, we hope you consider coming back for more. As I mentioned at the top of the program, we have lots more history happy hours coming to an internet connected device near you. On September 9th, look for a conversation on native beadwork, and then stay tuned for more conversations on historic murders, Indiana ghosts, all sorts of great stuff. You can find out more about that at indianahistory.org. We are in the middle of our Midwestern Roots Light, our virtual mini conference that helps you tell your family's stories by rebuilding the worlds they lived in. From urban neighborhoods to rural farms, we'll help you dive into the spaces and places where your family lived. If that sounds great, purchase some tickets at indianahistory.org to watch the recordings or catch our final sessions live next week. And lastly, next week, a week from tonight, we are doing this year's Lacey Family Distinguished Lecturer, where we're looking at the jazz state of Indiana. With Joshua A. Thompson, we'll explore Indiana's jazz history, accompanied by the sounds of the Quartet Premium Blend. We have filled up our theater, but you're more than welcome to jump on the wait list or check out indianahistory.org to find out how you can live stream that event. We'll post this conversation to YouTube and our website in the upcoming weeks. In the meantime, if you'd like to revisit any of our previous free programs or check out History Happy Hours on donuts and pirates and a lot of other things, underwear, things in between, you can check that out at indianahistory.org/virtual resources/video. And I'm sure Bethany's going to drop that in the chat for you. If you did miss a chance to get to donate or would like to make a further gift to support the Indiana Historical Society, you can also visit the link that will be dropped in your chat. Your donation allows us to continue to share Hoosier stories and offer events like this. Finally, you're going to get an email from us tomorrow morning with links and a survey included. It'll take you 1 whole minute. We hope you'll let us know what you thought, if you loved this event, and how we can make events better in the future. So with that, we hope you stay safe and stay healthy, and we can't wait to see you at another event in person or virtually soon. Thanks. Night, everybody.